After my wife left me for my brother because of astrology, I discovered the truth. Your brother paid me to tell her they were soulmates, the astrologer confessed when I confronted him. I immediately called my ex-wife. Let me back up and explain how I got to this point, because the whole situation is so insane that I still can't believe it happened to me. I'm Mike, 35, and I was married to Emma for 7 years, together for 10 total. We had what I thought was a solid marriage built on shared interests. We both loved traveling, cooking elaborate meals together, and binge-watching entire series and weekend marathons. We even had similar career goals and life philosophies. The one area where we differed was our approach to decision-making. I've always been a science and logic guy. I work as a senior software architect at a major tech company, pulling in $185,000 annually. And I've built my entire career on facts, data, and systematic analysis. Emma used to be the same way. She had a marketing degree and worked in digital analytics before we got married. She understood metrics, conversion rates, and data-driven strategies better than most people in her field. But then 2020 hit, and everything changed during those lockdown months. Like a lot of people stuck at home, Emma fell down the Instagram and TikTok rabbit hole, spending hours scrolling through content. At first, it seemed harmless enough. She'd read me my daily horoscope over coffee, or mentioned that Mercury was in retrograde when her laptop crashed. I didn't mind it, because it seemed to give her comfort during an uncertain time. When restrictions lifted, instead of reconnecting with friends or focusing on her career, Emma's first priority became finding a really good astrologer. I was surprised by how much energy she put into researching different practitioners, reading reviews, and comparing their approaches like she was hiring a financial advisor. But I love my wife, so I respected what appeared to be a new spiritual interest, even though it seemed like complete nonsense to my analytical mind. What started as casual interest quickly escalated into something much more extreme. Emma began spending hundreds of dollars monthly on birth chart readings, compatibility analyses, and astrological house cleansings. She consulted her astrologer, a guy named Marcus, who charged $150 per session for every major and minor decision. Should we book that vacation to Portland? Not until Venus exits retrograde. Could we discuss refinancing our mortgage? Only between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. on Wednesdays when my planetary alignment was favorable. The breaking point should have been when Emma insisted we couldn't make any important relationship decisions because our signs were fundamentally incompatible during certain lunar phases. She'd literally schedule our serious conversations around astrological timing, and she'd pick fights with me when Mars was in some configuration that supposedly made me more argumentative. At one point, she wanted us to move houses because our current home's energy wasn't aligned with her rising sign. I tried to be understanding because I genuinely loved her. I kept telling myself that relationships require compromise, and this was just her way of processing the stress of the past few years. I figured it was a phase, like when people get obsessed with CrossFit or essential oils. I thought if I remained supportive rather than dismissive, she'd eventually recognize how irrational it had become. Then came the day that destroyed everything. Emma asked me to sit down in our living room for something very important. She looked like she'd been crying for hours, and my stomach immediately dropped because I could tell this wasn't going to be good news about her job or her health. This felt bigger and more personal. Through tears, she explained that Marcus had done an extensive compatibility reading and discovered something life-altering. According to the stars, I wasn't her true soulmate. Instead, my brother David was her destined cosmic match. Marcus had apparently spent weeks analyzing both of our birth charts against David's, consulting multiple astrological systems, and cross-referencing our planetary alignments. The conclusion was definitive. David and Emma had a spiritual connection that transcended earthly relationships. I actually laughed at first, because I thought she was setting up some kind of elaborate joke. But as I watched Emma sob and explain how the universe had been trying to tell her this for months through various signs and synchronicities, I realized she was completely serious. She said our marriage had always felt energetically misaligned, and that's why we disagreed about things like her red outfit choices on days when Mars was in retrograde. Clearly, we were astrologically incompatible. What made the situation even more surreal was my brother's reaction. David is 33, works in commercial real estate, and has always been somewhat competitive with me, But I never thought he'd be okay with my wife leaving me for him based on astrological guidance. When Emma told him about Marcus's reading, David didn't express surprise, hesitation, or concern about destroying our family relationships. He just readily accepted that the universe wanted them together. My parents made everything worse by buying into the astrology explanation completely. They told me I should accept fate and not stand in the way of what was meant to be. My own family was telling me to gracefully step aside while my wife left me for my brother because some guy with crystals and star charts said they were cosmically compatible. The divorce process was brutal. During the mandatory 6-month waiting period, I had to watch Emma and David act like some fated couple, posting photos on social media about following their authentic path and trusting the universe's plan. It was humiliating, especially since most of our mutual friends seemed to think it was romantic rather than insane. For the next year, I focused on rebuilding my life. I went to therapy, threw myself into work, and got promoted to principal architect with a salary bump to $210,000. I cut contact with most of my family and started developing a new social circle of colleagues and neighbors who didn't know about the astrology divorce drama. It wasn't easy, but I was getting stronger and more independent than I'd been in years. Then, completely out of nowhere, Emma texted me urgently asking to meet. I hadn't heard from her since signing the final divorce papers, and seeing her name on my phone brought back all the anger and confusion I'd worked so hard to process. She insisted she had crucial information that couldn't wait and needed to tell me in person immediately. When I met her at a coffee shop near our old neighborhood, Emma looked terrible, exhausted, anxious, and like she hadn't been taking care of herself. The first words out of her mouth were apologies and admissions that she'd made a huge mistake. But I wasn't there for her emotional breakdown. I wanted to hear this supposedly important information. That's when she told me what she'd discovered. She'd overheard David on a phone call talking to someone about how easy it was to win her over. When she confronted him about the conversation, he initially tried to deflect, but eventually the truth came out. David had been talking to Marcus, her astrologer, and had paid him substantial amounts of money to convince Emma that they were destined soulmates. Emma had always been vulnerable to authority figures and expert opinions. It's what made her so good at her old marketing job, but also what made her susceptible to manipulation. David knew about her growing obsession with astrology and exploited it perfectly. He'd apparently harbored feelings for Emma for years, along with deep resentment about my career success and what he perceived as my perfect life. After living with David for a year, Emma realized he wasn't the spiritual, enlightened person Marcus had described in their compatibility readings. Instead, he'd become controlling and emotionally abusive, using her dependency on astrological validation to manipulate her decisions and isolate her from friends. Now she was desperate to come back to me, begging for forgiveness and a second chance. I told her I needed time to process this information, but honestly, I was already leaning toward not taking her back. Yes, she'd been manipulated and lied to, but she had also chosen to believe that some guy reading star charts knew more about our relationship than the 10 years we'd spent building a life together. She'd thrown away our marriage based on cosmic nonsense without even discussing it with me first. But I knew I needed concrete proof before making any final decisions about Emma or figuring out how to handle David. Despite everything, a small part of me wondered if there was some misunderstanding, or if Emma was trying to manipulate me now. I decided to track down Marcus myself and get the truth directly from the source. Finding Marcus wasn't difficult. He had a website, social media presence, and operated out of a small office in a strip mall about 20 minutes from my house. I scheduled an appointment under a fake name, paying his $150 consultation fee, and went in prepared to record our conversation on my phone. Initially, Marcus gave me the standard astrological consultant performance, vague statements about planetary influences, generic personality assessments based on my supposed birth time, and predictions that could apply to anyone's life circumstances. But when I started asking specific questions about relationship compatibility readings and mentioned David's name casually, his demeanor shifted noticeably. I pressed harder, mentioning that I knew about his arrangement with David and that I had evidence of their financial transactions. Marcus became defensive, then scared, and finally broke down completely. He admitted that David had approached him 6 months before the divorce, offering initially $2,000, then eventually $5,000 total, to convince Emma that she and David were cosmically destined partners. David had done his homework thoroughly. He knew Emma's birth information, her astrological interests, and exactly how to present the soulmate narrative in a way she'd find believable. Marcus created elaborate fake charts, invented mystical connection theories, and spent weeks building up the cosmic compatibility story during Emma's regular sessions. Marcus tried to justify his actions by explaining his financial desperation. He had child support payments, business loans, and barely enough clients to cover basic expenses. When David offered him more money than he typically made in 3 months, he convinced himself he was just helping people find their true path rather than destroying a marriage. I left that meeting with a recording of Marcus's full confession and finally had the proof I needed, but I also realized I had an opportunity for something much bigger than just personal closure. Marcus had committed fraud, David had engaged in systematic manipulation and conspiracy, and both of them had destroyed my marriage for their own selfish purposes. As a senior software architect, I'm naturally systematic in my approach to problem solving, and I decided to treat this situation like any other complex technical challenge. I needed to document everything, consult with experts, and build a comprehensive strategy that would address both the legal and personal aspects of what they'd done to me. My first call was to James Patterson, a lawyer I'd worked with on intellectual property issues at my company. James specializes in fraud cases and immediately recognized the potential civil and possibly criminal implications of David and Marcus's scheme. He recommended I also consult with Rebecca Foster, a private investigator who could help document the extent of the conspiracy and gather additional evidence. Rebecca's investigation revealed that Marcus had actually done this type of paid manipulation for at least 3 other clients over the past 2 years. David wasn't his first customer for fake astrological compatibility readings. She also discovered that David had been planning this for much longer than 6 months, based on social media activity, search histories, and financial records showing he'd been researching astrology and Emma's specific interests for over a year before approaching Marcus. With James's guidance, I filed a civil lawsuit against both David and Marcus for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy. The legal costs were significant, about $15,000 up front, but my salary and savings could easily cover it, and James was confident we had a strong case for substantial damages, including my legal fees. But I also wanted to address this situation publicly, both to warn other people about Marcus's fraudulent practices and to make sure David faced social consequences for his actions. Rebecca had helped me gather evidence of Marcus's other fake readings, and I had documentation of the financial payments between David and Marcus, plus recorded confessions from Marcus about the entire scheme. I created a detailed timeline of events, including screenshots, financial records, and audio recordings, and posted it to several social media platforms, local community groups, and review sites for Marcus's business. I made sure to stick to factual information and avoid emotional language, presenting it more like a case study than a personal vendetta. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Marcus's business reviews plummeted overnight, with dozens of former clients sharing their own stories of questionable advice and expensive readings that led to poor decisions. Several people mentioned that they'd suspected Marcus was a fraud, but didn't have proof until seeing my documentation. David's reputation suffered even more severely. Our mutual friends, his professional network, and even some clients learned about his elaborate scheme to steal his brother's wife through astrological manipulation. The commercial real estate industry in our area is relatively small and relationship-based, so David's trustworthiness became a serious professional liability practically overnight. Within 2 weeks, David had lost 3 major clients who didn't want to be associated with someone who'd engage in such calculated deception. His business partner started distancing himself from David, and several pending deals fell through when the story spread through their professional network. Emma called me multiple times during this period, alternating between thanking me for exposing the truth and begging me not to pursue legal action that would further embarrass her. She'd already left David after discovering his manipulation, moved back in with her parents, and was trying to rebuild her life without astrological guidance. But I wasn't interested in protecting Emma's feelings anymore. She'd made her choices, and while I understood she'd been manipulated, she'd also chosen to believe in cosmic destiny rather than communicating with me about whatever problems she felt our marriage had. Taking her back would mean accepting that our relationship was worth less to her than a stranger's interpretation of star positions. The legal case moved forward quickly since we had such comprehensive evidence. Marcus settled out of court for $25,000 plus agreement to pay my legal fees and shut down his astrology business permanently. David fought the lawsuit initially, but eventually agreed to a $40,000 settlement when it became clear that a trial would only create more public exposure of his actions. More importantly, the social consequences continued building for months. David had to close his real estate business and move to a different city to escape the reputation damage. Marcus couldn't restart his astrology practice and had to find regular employment. Emma struggled to rebuild her career and social relationships after being associated with such a bizarre scandal. Meanwhile, my life improved significantly. The legal victory and public vindication helped me process the emotional trauma of the divorce. My promotion at work came with additional responsibilities, managing a team of 12 developers, and I used the experience of handling this personal crisis to develop better leadership and crisis management skills. I also started dating someone new, Jennifer, a financial analyst who values logic, communication, and evidence-based decision-making. We've been together for 8 months now, taking things slowly, but building a relationship based on mutual respect and rational discussion rather than cosmic compatibility. Looking back, I'm actually grateful this happened, despite how painful it was at the time. Emma's astrology obsession and David's manipulation revealed fundamental incompatibilities and character flaws that probably would have caused problems eventually. The experience taught me to trust my analytical instincts, stand up for myself more effectively, and not compromise my core values for the sake of keeping peace in relationships. David never recovered professionally or socially from the scandal. Emma eventually moved to another state and, according to mutual friends, now completely avoids anything related to astrology. Marcus works at a car dealership and presumably no longer claims to read cosmic destinies for a living. As for me, I'm in the best professional and personal position of my life, with a relationship built on honest communication rather than mystical nonsense, and the satisfaction of knowing that people who tried to manipulate and deceive me faced real consequences for their actions.